Okay. Good evening, councillors and members of the public. Before we commence the meeting, I'd like to draw your attention to the fire regulations, which are now on the board behind me. There are no practice fire alarms planned for this evening, so in the event of the alarm sounding, please leave the building as quickly as possible by one of three exits. 1, 2, 3, the one we mainly came in by. And we'll assemble across the road under the canopy outside Waitrose. Mobile phones, can we all switch them to silent or to off? Not like the meeting this morning in front of the inspector on the local plan, when about 2 minutes after he'd said switch your phones off, the first one sounded. Anyone whose phone sounds tonight will pay £5 for the Mayor's charity. Members of the public, I'd like to say that as a committee we understand that the matters under consideration this evening may be emotive. They are emotive. However, I'd like to ask you to respect those around you in the public gallery and the committee and refrain from expressing your feelings by booing, cheering or any other form of disturbance. This is a meeting held in public. It is not a public meeting. As this meeting's being webcast, can I just introduce the officers sitting in front of me here? We've got two lawyers, Lewis Jones and Barry Devlin, Peter Cleveland, Head of Development Control, Chris French, who is the Senior Planning Officer dealing with tonight's application, and Elizabeth Sims, Head of Planning. Members, we have a considerable number of planning applications that are coming to the Joint Planning Committee in the few weeks ahead. In some cases where two applications have common grounds, we may have to consider these in one session. It's not ideal, and both Councillor Coburn and I have expressed our concerns on this, but it's probably better to have one night of two applications rather than two applications in a week. We're also approaching a period of holidays, and our officers are doing everything in their power to produce their reports expeditiously, but also complete. We also have to regard the applicants who may not agree to an extension of the consultation period and would be inclined to appeal on grounds of non-determination, not a course that we would wish to contemplate. The officers will be shortening their presentations, as Peter will probably explain in a few minutes, shortening to some degree. Therefore, I'd stress that our reading of the agenda reports is thorough, and ask that if you have a query on any matter in the report, you contact the case officer prior to the meeting. I know many of you already do this. May I also ask that we leave some of our hobby horses at home and concentrate on planning criteria. I also ask members to try and put all their thoughts into one presentation and not keep coming back. Sometimes it's unavoidable, I know that, and when another member's raised a point that requires further comment. In no way do I suggest that I would curtail debate, but I sometimes see repetition just continually. So, just a few thoughts from me. Moving on to the items business. Item number 1, minutes of the last meeting held on the 24th of May 17. They've been laid on the table for the last half hour. Is it your wish I sign them as a true record? Thank you very much. Emma, apologies for absence and substitution.
We have apologies from Councillors Brian Adams, Kevin Denis, David Else, Pat Frost, Michael Goodridge, Stephen Hill, Anna James and John Ward. We have substitutes Councillors Jeanette Stennett and Patricia Ellis. Thank you.
Thank you. Declarations of interest, Emma.
None received before the meeting.
Councillor Foresti.
Thank you, Chairman, and my apologies for not submitting prior to the meeting. Yes, I would like to declare non-pecuniary interest. I'm the Chairman of Cranley Parish Council, and the reason I mention this item is on page 106. It talks about heads of terms and sports and leisure, where there's contributions made towards facilities in Cranley, of which Cranley is the owners of some of the facilities. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. No one else? Emma, any questions from members of the public?
None received, Chairman.
Thank you. Item number 5, application for planning permission. A1 is postponed. As you know, land on the west side of Green Lane, Badshot Lee. So we move straight on to applications for planning. A2, land south of Umbridge Road, Cranley. And to introduce this, we have Peter Cleveland and Chris French.
Thank you, Thank you, Chairman. This application seeks full planning permission for the erection of 54 dwellings with access onto Elmbridge Road. There are some updates contained within the addendum, along with a few additional oral updates. Within the addendum, you will see that we've suggested an amendment to Condition 6 to make this a prior to first occupation rather than a pre-commencement condition. We've also suggested an update, suggested an amendment to Condition 12 for a phased discharge of the SUDS verification. With regards to Condition 9, officers have agreed that this is adequately covered in the reports and therefore are suggesting that that condition be removed. Comments have also now been received from Thames Water following a reconsultation on the odour survey. Thames Water are raising no objections. 10 further neighbour representations have been received raising objection. These reiterate issues already raised in neighbour responses. Confirmation has also been received in writing from the applicants that they would be relocating the existing power cables underground and that the cost has been considered as part of the applicant's internal viability and is not prohibitive. There's also one amendment to the officer's report, page 126. This refers to the height of the tallest building being 8.9 metres. This should be 9.4 metres, as one of the detached housing types and one of the semi-detached properties is taller than the 8.9 metres referenced in the report. I'll now run through the details of the application. This is the location plan. The site's outlined in red. Got a question.
Councillor Story, sorry.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. I just wondered if you could have a couple of the lights off. Can't see the screen.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is the location plan. The application site's outlined in red. It forms a field adjacent to the settlement boundary with Cranley. The Elmbridge Road runs along the northern boundary from east to west here. Cranley Waters, which is the river, runs down to the west of the site. On the opposite side of the road, you've got the Cranley Sewage Works. This is an aerial photograph of the site. You can see from the plan the relationship between the application site, where I've highlighted it in red, and the West Cranley Nurseries site, which has recently received a resolution to grant permission for housing. This is the proposed site layout. As you can see, the development would comprise of a mixture of detached, semi-detached terrace properties and flats, ranging in detail and design. All properties would be 2-storey in height. There's a tree belt which runs along the northern and the eastern boundaries, and it would be largely retained. A footpath link is proposed on the eastern boundary, which is up here where I'm marking it on the plan. I've highlighted the affordable units on this plan in blue, just so you can see how they are positioned within the site. The flatted building is positioned centrally within the site here. The open space is to the south and the west and is within flood zones 2 and 3. And these are some of the elevations and floor plans. This is plot 1, which is a detached four-bedroom property. It has a mixture of gable features, hipped roofs, some tile hanging, and a feature bay window. And the floor plan is on the right-hand side there. And these are plots 8 and 9, which are a pair of semi-detached properties with gable features at the front, some tile hanging brickwork below. These properties have a ridge height of approximately 8.8 metres. And these are the elevations of plots 18 to 21. These would have, you can see, clay tiles, porches, and brick facing, and also some boarding on the front of plots. I think it's 20 and 21. Plot 21 would be part of the affordable provision, and plots 18, 19, and 20 are the markets units. And these are the floor plans of those units. This is plot 10, 11, and 12. They form part of the affordable housing provision. They're 3-bedroom units, and the ridge height of these properties is 9.4 metres. And here we have plots 22 to 29. They comprise of 8 flats in the form of 5 2-bedroom units and 3 1-bedroom units. These also form part of the affordable housing provision. The building would be 2-storey in height, have a ridge height of approximately 8.9 metres. The elevation at the top of the slide is the principal elevation facing the internal road, and contains a mixture of gable features, weatherboarding above first floor, and then brickwork at the ground floor level. And these are the proposed floor plans. We have a street scene drawing here, which is the street scene as you would enter the site, running from point B to point B there. And it shows the mixture of designs and materials that are proposed, and the differences in scale between the buildings. And this is another of the street scene drawings, but from within the site. And these are a few of the photographs from the site. The photograph on the top left is taken from the Elmbridge Road, looking towards where the point of access would be. As you can see, there's a mature tree belt along that access. And the photograph on the bottom right is taken from within the site. The tree belt on the left is the one fronting the Elmbridge Road, and the trees that you can see at the far end of that photograph are the ones that front the Elm Park Road. And this is looking towards the boundary with Elm Park Road from within the site. This slide splits the main issues into matters of principle and technical opinion on the left-hand side and matters of judgment on the right. In terms of the main considerations, officers consider that there would be an impact on the countryside from the development. However, this is outweighed by the benefits of delivering the housing in a location that officers consider to be an appropriate extension of the settlement. Turning to the layout and design of the development, properties are of an appropriate mix, design and scale, and officers are satisfied as a whole that the development is acceptable on design and layout grounds. It should be noted that the applicant has submitted an odour survey, and this has been reviewed by both the Council's Environmental Health Department and also Thames Water. On the basis of the reports, neither raise objection. With regards to flood risk, the majority of the development is outside of flood zones 2 and 3. Mitigation is proposed for plot 49 to ensure this property would not be unacceptably impacted on by flooding, subject to appropriate conditions. No objections are raised by the Environment Agency, and it is considered that the development would not materially impact on flood risk. The application proposes to utilise sustainable urban drainage systems, which have been reviewed by the local lead flood authority and are considered to be acceptable. Furthermore, whilst it is noted that a number of representations raised concerns with foul sewage capacity, Thames Water have confirmed that there is no objection on capacity grounds. For the reasons set out in the officer's report, as updated in the addendum, recommendation A is for approval. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. This is an application with public speaking, so first of all I'll ask Adrian Clark. Ms. Clark, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The applicant's site has flooded several times in the last few years. This photo, which I'm not allowed to show you, shows a car stranded on Elmbridge Road in December 2014, next to the applicant's site, which was under deep water. By the way, the applicant's site is at a lower level than the road. You can see the house in the background across the road from the applicant's site, which was badly flooded, and it took builders about a year before the owners could move back in. The second photo, which I'm not allowed to show you, shows more common, less extreme flooding of the applicant's site when the flooding was not deep enough to cover the road. Since the 1st of January 2009, new houses built on the floodplains aren't covered under the government's Flood-Re house insurance scheme. Second point is Cranley Sewage Works pumps its sewage effluent into a river called Cranley Waters. Over the last few years, Cranley Waters has progressively had less flow in summer, at times stopping altogether, last weekend, for example. But Cranley Sewage Works relentlessly pumps out sewage effluent 24/7 at the rate currently of 2 Olympic-sized swimming pools in volume per day. The resultant pollution has made the river downstream of the sewage works turn eutrophic, and the fish have died out. Thames Water can increase capacity, as you just mentioned, but the Environment Agency doesn't have an answer to the river flow problem. In February this year, the Environment Agency stated that the failing elements are phosphates, macrophytes and diatoms. No one has an answer for the nitrates problem. If you approve this scheme tonight, you'll be contravening the Water Framework Directive, which states that no person or corporate body can do anything to worsen the chance of a UK water body reaching good status by the end of 2027. The next point is the applicant's site is opposite a sewage works. Last October, Thames Water objected to this application, saying that the applicant would need to submit data showing no adverse impact. We have it in writing from Thames Water that no odour-reducing works have been carried out since then. After that, Thames Water published 2 odour assessments. The first, this January, was a compilation report for the years 2011 to 2015 based on historical measurements that they have to do under the odour nuisance regulations. This report shows an odour nuisance zone covering virtually the whole of the site. This is also in line with our own odour survey that we carried out last year, July. The second report was for results measured over 2 cold days in early May this year, with temperatures ranging from 3 degrees to 13 degrees. If you compare the results to the January report for the years 2011 to 2015, they're about 1/10 of the average 2011-2015 figures. And the report even states that odour emission rates are lower in cold weather. And yes, you guessed it, the applicant has only submitted the cold days report. And planning officers got a no objection statement from Thames Water against this report. I think planning officers are hoping that no one would bring this true situation to your notice. Using a pun, I think that stinks. Regarding the floodings, I've got just a few seconds left. I think last time this application came before Waverley was in 1968. And it was just, I think, 2 days after the whole of Cranley flooded, and there was 5 foot of water in Cranley High Street. So you can imagine how much underwater the site was. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clark. I now ask Councillor Friesen, Cranley Parish Council.
Good evening, members and officers. We in Cranley are astounded that there has been an executive decision to recommend to Council this Thacombe Homes application. Against all voices in Cranley and further afield, you are recommending the building of 54 houses on a significant floodplain. No wonder no one in Cranley has any confidence in you, the executive. Just yards upstream and to the east, Waverley Borough Council have approved the building of over 800 houses that cover various types of flood zones. The Thacombe Home site is now the last vestige of the floodplain in this area. Many Cranleians and indeed councillors have seen this area underwater with their own eyes. Close by this site in 2013, Mr. and Mrs. Weldon, who live at Rye Farm Cottage, had to be rescued by the fire brigade from the floodwaters that engulfed their home. The owner of the site was reported for keeping horses on unsuitable land when they were up to their knees in water and mud. So when our planners come to this extraordinary and irresponsible recommendation, they argue that desktop studies show there to be no reason for concern. Well, I have to say in this instance, it reminds me of the obduracy of customer service telling us the computer says so. It is the real local knowledge on the ground that counts. We need a considerable input of common sense here, for even if they can raise the ground level, it will just create problems downstream in Bramley, Shelford and Guildford. It seems, perhaps surprisingly, that I have to remind planners that the purpose of a floodplain is to hold water. There has been absolutely no testing of the cumulative effects of inundation on the combined 3 and now possibly 4 developments of 864 houses, their relevant suds and ground now covered in brick and asphalt. The Environment Agency have said that this area is prone to flash flooding, and Thames Water have told us that the real and measurable effects of global warming are already being felt. And although we have about the same amount of rain over the year, the periods of rain are becoming shorter and more intense, so increasing the risk of flash flooding. The need for floodplains is ever more increasing, and yet the Waverley planners seem to think it's okay to recommend. This is based on thinking that is not neutral. I can just imagine the kind of pressure prevalent in the planning department from the executive. The push for building at all costs is shameful and deeply harmful to the citizens of Waverley. It seems that the civil servants of Waverley and their executive have to be reminded that their job is to serve the public and not the government. Yet your agenda is anti-Cranley, anti-Waverley and anti-common sense. Your role has changed from being neutrally dispassionate to hatchet men and women thoughtlessly doing the bidding of some hurtful, poorly argued and poorly provisioned agenda that is laying waste to our country. Recent events in London have given us an all too painful reminder of what happens when councils and especially their executives do not listen to their electorate and the community they serve. It is not good enough to think that the reckoning will come long after your departure. I recommend Council to correct this wrong and reject this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Friesen. Let the officers later on reply to some of those comments that I think are inappropriate, in that they are not the experts on flooding, it is the others. So I will ask Elizabeth to do that right now.
Thank you, Chairman. Some of the technical things that were raised we will bring into our responses slightly later in the discussion, but one thing I would like to pick up from that statement, of course, planning is not an executive function, and that the decisions of the planning committee sit outside the executive. They are it's a non-executive function. I think it's a very important point to rehearse, particularly as a public statement. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Now ask the supporter, Mr. Robert Batten, to take 4 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, members, my name is Rob Boughton and I am the Group Managing Director of Thacombe Homes, and thank you for allowing me to address you to this evening. Thacombe Homes is a regional house builder based in Sussex, down just outside Billingshurst, approximately 10 miles from this site. We work across Sussex and Surrey, and in the last few years we've established a reputation for building high-quality homes on developments that come with all the infrastructure needed to enable them to integrate in the communities in which we work. A recent example of this can be found locally at Rudgwick, on a development we are just finishing. We are privately owned, and our reputation is key to our future success. The application before you is the end of product of months of work with my team, working alongside the planning team. Both sides have equally wanted to ensure that every aspect is being scrutinised by the officers to ensure that the application responds appropriately to the community concerns and the strict expectations you have set for house builders to ensure only the best possible developments come for your consideration. The process we have undertaken with officers has addressed the concerns we know that Cranley Parish Council have raised regarding the drainage on site and the flooding risk. Following the intense scrutiny of the drainage arrangements proposed, both your officers and the Environment Agency are satisfied that the layout of the site does not pose any flood risk for new or existing residents. They are also satisfied with the measures we are proposing to deal with the drainage effectively on the site, and that the arrangements for sewage and foul water are of the required standard. We know that drainage and sewage are issues consistently raised by the Parish Council and members of this committee, and respect that concern, and that is why we have made our number one priority in working with your officers. Indeed, Thames Water have recently completed odour surveys in May. We've gone to great lengths to give reassurance that this site with the conditions proposed can come forward without causing any detriment to the sewage system in Cranley. We understand there may be some concern with regard to the costs of redirecting the power cables on the site, and we can confirm we have a full quotation from UK Power Networks for £35,000. This amount is factored into our viability for the scheme. We will not be looking to come back and renegotiate the Section 106. We draw our design inspiration for existing features of the surrounding area. You can see from display boards and material you've seen that the designs we'll be using for these homes, and I hope you can see the high quality we hold ourselves to. We are very proud of the homes that we build, and we ensure that the highest quality standard at every stage. We are aware that the community has experienced serious issues relating to construction traffic recently too. We understand that existing residents, while accepting the need for new housing, are understandably concerned about the impact of construction on their lives. With this in mind, we are open to working with the parish and ward councillors to ensure consistent communication throughout the construction process. Indeed, this is something that we do elsewhere very successfully. This will ensure the community is notified of works ahead of time and that any issues that arise are discussed immediately and not left unanswered. We would like to thank the officers for their hard work in bringing this application to committee. It has been a long journey and we're grateful for their efforts. The result is an application which, as you as committee members can be confident in supporting, and that every aspect has been scrutinised properly. There are no outstanding objections from statutory consultees, and whilst we understand that the residents of the Parish Council have their concerns, the report in front of you sets out the mitigation measures which we included to effectively address them. Therefore, we respectfully request that after consideration of facts of this case, you vote to approve this application in line with your officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. Now turn to the Ward Councillor, Councillor Liz Townsend.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members. It is my opinion that this is one of the worst sites in Cranley that's come before this committee. I have to disagree about the EA having no objection. They have pointed out that the SUDs will be in flood zone 2 and basically of no use. There is also a house being built. Plot 49 is actually in flood zone 2 as well, and I think members should be aware of that. Officers may be satisfied about the flooding on this site. I have seen it with my own eyes. I saw it in December 13. Well, actually, it was just at the end of December, and that was after the floodwater had begun to subside because I went down to see some friends who live on the Elmbridge Road. There was only about 10 to 20 feet of this site that was not underwater at that stage. I have seen it in January 15, I have seen it in January 14, I have seen it in January 16, and I have seen it in March 16 underwater, and I have submitted photograph evidence of this. The Parish Council has objected to this and have sent in photographic evidence. The evidence in January 15, 16 and March 16 was not after that heavy rainfall. It had been a few days of rain, nothing that spectacular. This site regularly is underwater. It's a fact. Today I spoke to the Weldons and I said to them about this site going for permission tonight, and that Mr. Weldon said, "Are they mad?" He said, "What has happened to our planners?" I asked him if he had seen the site flooded prior to December 13, and he said yes, all the time. It floods whenever it rains heavily. I also spoke to another resident who'd lived on the Elmbridge Road for 65 years and asked him if he could remember flooding on the site consistently, and he said yes, of course. He said it's flooded, it always floods when it rains heavily. It's a floodplain, he said. He also said he remembers the flooding in 1968, which was referred to earlier, and the field was completely underwater, flooded back onto the Elmbridge Road. I have no idea how this site passes the sequential test at all, and I would ask members to probe that. This is, as been said, the last trace of Cranley's floodplain, and it offers a little bit of protection to the Weldons, and I firmly believe that building on this site will increase flooding downstream. What wasn't shown on the officers' pictures earlier was that the Littlemead Brook also is to the south of the site as well, and we've just had a flood warning today on Cranley Waters and the Littlemead Brook. It's not just the flooding that causes the damage on this site, and for the Weldons as well. It is the fear of flooding. As you see, the river rising, and it rises all the time there. It is, as is known, a flashy catchment. It suffers from flash flooding there. We are not just exaggerating this. That is the last bit of our floodplain, and it is the last bit of land that is holding back some of the water from the Weldons. I have concerns, as everybody else, about the number of houses that have already been built on our floodplain higher up, and the cumulative impact has not even been seen yet. We have a 5-year housing supply. Why are we building any properties in flood zone 2? Please answer me that. Can you imagine living in a house here? Also, living with the smell, the odour. I know it smells down there. I've walked past it. I cannot believe how the odour report has changed from January to the recent one. The tables of results on table 7 in the original report and table 10 on the second report bear no resemblance to each other. It is absolutely ridiculous. The temperature of the odour test was taken when it was really, really cold. It was the coldest days during that month. If you cast your mind back, it was actually snowing at the beginning of May. We shouldn't be building homes here on land that floods and where it's basically smelly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Members, now your turn. Councillor Forresky.
Thank you, Chairman. The clock is running. Can I just start by saying I fully understand your opening remarks, and I do have some empathy with it. But I would say this is really, really important, and I think the frustration and the fear displayed tonight by the Parish Council, Chairman of the Planning Committee, Brian Freeston, just speaks volumes of the way people actually do feel it. It is serious, it is important, and it should be a matter that has a little bit of empathy from all involved. I would like to start, though, by going to page 111 of the report and looking at planning considerations. It states that planning system is plan-led. So confident is the applicant in this case that they've gone for full permission. That is not being plan-led, that is assuming that they're going to get the permission because that's what seems to be happening at the moment. I've got no problem with an application coming forward that actually says it's going to be a full application because it does save a lot of time wasting. But however, the planning considerations talk about 3 dimensions to sustainable and suitable development, one of which is the economic, the social and the environment. We cannot ignore the cumulative impact of everything that's going on in Cranley. Cranley's saturated, it's overdose on everything. It talks about the right type, the right place, the right time. It's not vibrant or healthy to meet unmet need, and yet it's been identified by the applicant as just coming into the borders where it's like there's no border control. So applications keep coming forward, we keep having to address them, and we keep having to pass them. It shouldn't be done like this. Again, added to other things, it does nothing to enhance, protect, or look at our historic environmental aspects. It exacerbates the problems that are there, and it adds to problems that are going to happen into the future. This is not planning. What we're doing here, it's not planning, or it's not planning-led. It's pressure. It's outrageous. It's desperate. Reading the report, whilst I had the greatest admiration for our officers and the work and the actual pressures that they're under, I got more and more frustrated by the sentence, especially given that only a very short few months ago, in conversations with the officers, it was categorically said to me that this was a site that was highly unlikely to get a positive recommendation because of all the things that the two councillors have already mentioned this evening. So what's changed? If we look at planning considerations, let me list you several material planning considerations why this application is wrong. Starting with the crucial feedback from the application in 1984. It's in the report. It lists 7 sound, robust reasons for refusal. Yes, time has moved on, but little, with the exception of a few dwellings in this landscape, has changed. The only significant change in this part of Cranley is that 11 years ago, Surrey County Council altered the bridge to become single-way traffic, making it a priority passing, making it even more difficult to get in and out of Cranley. I've lived in Cranley for 11 years, but I worked in Cranley. 25 years ago, I remember my journey to Cranley Village Hospital, driving through floods, taking diversions, going round the Wrekin. Cranley is known for its flooding. It's called Cranley for a reason. My fellow councillors have also already talked about flooding. It's not a subject that I'm an expert on, so I'm going to stay well out of that one. It talks about the report and it talks about the Cranley design statement. It talks about financial contributions are made. Part of this site are unsustainable for agricultural use and therefore not used. But we're saying in the report, housing is accepted. Plot 49 has already been mentioned. Plot 49 in the report says it's at risk. We're admitting a risk by saying we're going to build a plot in a zone that's wholly unacceptable. It talks about, it's already been mentioned, but I have to mention it again, the exception test here has been applied, but not the sequential test. The application is reliant on the other 15 sites within level 2 of the SRFA and assumed this site would therefore pass. This site, given its flooding history, should have a sequential test. The Elmbridge Road is served by 2 one-way roads, 1 local shop, and the high street is quite some distance away. I have a problem with the affordable housing mix. It's a 50-50 split. 8 out of 15 fail the technical space standard, mainly the 3-bedroom dwellings, 22 of which out of 54 being the highest proportion. Parking provision, it's not equal or fair across the site. While some benefit from over-provision, many are under the required provision. On page 22, Surrey County Council Landscape Character Assessment makes really, really interesting and important reading, especially on the local amenity. Page 127, Transport. The accumulative effect, we have to take it into consideration. It actually states, development should only be prevented or refused on transport grounds where there is cumulative impacts of development are severe. If we join it all up, it's not severe, it's catastrophic to what's going to happen to the future of Cranley. We're going to grind to a halt. Taken in isolation on its own merits is fine, but we have to look at the cumulative impact. It's already been said that we're going to have in excess of so many vehicle movements coming in and out of traffic. Mainly the development that we're talking about, the Berkeley Homes, the KPI and the Little Meadow, they're all in that one stretch. They are going to come out onto the Elmbridge Road, onto the 281, onto the 2 bridges that can only allow 1 traffic per moment. All I would say here is development should only be prevented or refused on transport grounds where there is cumulative impact on development are severe. They are severe. I would end this by saying our local plan part 1 is currently underway. Would it not be prudent, sensible and professional to wait until its outcome, as we may, however much we think we do not and may not need this site. I think it's prudent to... I cannot support the site for a number of reasons, but I think there's even greater evidence out there for us to actually say, we've got a local plan that's currently going through examination, part 1. We have, going forward, an opportunity to look at other sites that are more suitable. There are so many unknown quantities with this application. The future looks bleak for anyone in and around that area who knowingly would buy a house in that area that's going to flood, be next to the sewerage works, when we have an opportunity to actually do something now. So, Chairman, forgive my rant and my hobby horse, but it has to be said, this is irresponsible to push yet another unsustainable development on Cranley, knowing that it floods, and it's already said plot 49 in the report is at risk. Thank you, Chairman, for listening to me.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Munner.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm actually going to speak briefly and move for a deferral. And obviously I don't attract a seconder or it isn't supported. I have other comments to make. But listening to the comments, there seem to be two areas where we have inadequate information. The first relates to odour. The idea of conducting a test on a cold day in an odour situation is similar to conducting a vehicle demand test during the school holidays. You simply get unreliable information. And if the facts as suggested by the local member are that this was conducted on a very cold day and bears no relation to a report issued a little time earlier, then clearly we are in a difficult situation. And I would like to suggest that it would be only fair to the prospective residents that this be tested on a hot day when the flies are at work and the smell is likely to be at its greatest. The second area relates to flooding, and it is an inconsistency between the attitude of the Environment Agency and one officer of the local lead flood authority and a second officer. I refer to the letters that are available on the website, beginning with one dated 19th of October 2016 from Helen Parkin, who notes that the attenuating suds are to be placed in the national flood zones and suggests that it is worth consulting the Environment Agency on this. And in December, on the 7th, Mr. Joe Callard writes, Sustainable drainage systems. We note that the proposed attenuating suds elements are located in flood zone 2. During flood, these are likely to be ineffective for surface water storage as they will fill with fluvial water. To be effective, these attenuation areas will need to be moved to flood zone 1. Responsibility for ensuring provision of adequate surface water drainage lies with the lead local flood authority, which in this instance is Surrey County Council. That leaves me in a state of some uncertainty. I appreciate that the Environment Agency, in a sense, delegate this decision to the lead local flood authority, but I am disturbed that there seems to be such a clear difference in their attitudes to this aspect. So the reason why I wish to suggest a deferral is that time should be taken for a proper odour assessment on a suitable day, and this inconsistency between the attitude of the Environment Agency and the local lead flood authority on the issue of where these suds should be placed can be explored further. And it's fair to say this is a sensitive site, and flooding is the main reason why it's sensitive, and I would feel most uncomfortable about reaching a decision when this sort of question remains in limbo. But I would need to ask for a seconder at this point.
Councillor Band.
I would be happy to second, Chairman, and if I can say reasons why. I think we are, as members, in a very difficult position where it's clear local evidence to the contrary of the statements made by the statutory consultees. If we go against a recommendation going against the recommendations of statutory consultees, we're on a hiding to nothing when this comes to appeal. I do think we need to resolve these things properly and sensibly in front of us. And so both from the odour perspective and the flooding perspective, I would welcome a deferment where we have more evidence and proper presentations made to us so to get to the bottom of this situation in front of the statutory consultees. Thank you, Chair.
Does anyone else want to speak to that proposal? And seconded. Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'm inclined to agree on certainly on the point that Councillor Band has just made in respect of going against the statutory consultees. I was quite prepared from what I've heard already to vote against this on my experience of other developments where suds certainly could not be placed in the flood zone. And I'm very, very concerned about recommendation, the condition 7 that's recommended, which proposes that how the SUDs work and land levels and all sorts are being left till later, and I certainly don't feel that I could assess properly the implications of this development. And obviously from videos that I've seen online, whatever, I know that where I consider the truth to lie in this instance. But I would certainly want us to have detailed information. If it's going to come back, I don't want to waste my time and just come back to exactly the same situation as we have today. We've got an odour report which was done, which did show that the odour was unsatisfactory. So I tend to think that perhaps we could rely upon that if we wanted to. I'm just wondering whether we're going to have the information, the full information that we need. I would want to know where flood zone 3 actually lies on these ends on these maps, because flood zone 3 is your functional floodplain, and it's the 1 in 100 plus climate change level. I know from videos that I've seen that it floods onto the road and floods virtually all of this site, but people here have been telling me that it's flood zone 2 that they're concerned about, which is the 1 in 1,000 year, I understand. So I think there's some confusion here, as there was with a development in Badshot Lee, which I queried at the time, as to which flood zone people are talking about. And I want it certainly to be clarified, and some maps in front of us showing exactly where these flood zones are and what SUDs are proposed for those. And I'd certainly want more details of the drainage system before I would be able to vote in favour of this development, certainly. Thank you.
Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to support the motion for deferral. I think one of our responsibilities here is to try and balance the views of local people and what we read from officers. And I've got great concern over the flooding side and of the odour. I think there are two things that have been highlighted, and having read through the reports a number of times, I don't believe the report brings this out in terms of the potential impact, the issues have been raised. I think we have an obligation to the people of Cranley to ask for further examination of this and to get a more detailed response. Thank you.
Councillor Stewart-Tennant.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll be brief. I've lived in Cranley for over 50 years, worked on many of the major infrastructures there, sewers and so forth, and to put it simply, that field floods. As it is, it's a no-go. The desktop reports are not worth the paper they're written on, and I know you can change levels with excavators, because that's what I do, but that is ludicrous to build on that as it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Do the officers want to make any comment at this stage before we move to the vote?
Thank you, Chairman. I'll just pick up on the two specific points which have been put forward for deferral. I mean, they've obviously been raised tonight. They're not new points to officers. The application has been before us for some time, and we've delayed it for additional information on specifically those 2 points that the deferral is put forward for. So I'd just touch on the odour assessment, and there's been concerns around that. Just to clarify that there was originally an objection raised to the desk-based assessment that was done. They carried out an on-site assessment, and subsequently the objections from our own environmental health officers and Thames Water, who need to take account of that, were removed on the basis of them doing on-site assessments. Appreciate some comments have been made about members of the public and the parish don't consider it's sufficient, the level of testing have been done, but the appropriate professional bodies and professional officers of the council as well have assessed that and found the assessments being carried out sufficient to demonstrate there wouldn't be a nuisance from odour to future occupants. So I think just need to make that clear that we have interrogated that point. We've given the applicant the chance to go away and do that work and come back, and that's been assessed by appropriate officers and Thames Water. In terms of flood risk, quite rightly, Councillor Muller picked up that there's a difference of opinion between the lead local flood authority. We have interrogated that position as well. The previous officer that commented on it had those comments, but the most up-to-date position and the most recent position on the updated evidence provided by the applicants is that the proposed SUDs could work appropriately. And also need to remind members that matters that can be dealt with by condition should be. We shouldn't be requiring all information up front if the level of information provided demonstrates it can be achieved in principle, and the appropriate detailed level should be secured by condition if it can. So going forward, we've taken that advice based on flood risk and found it to be acceptable on that basis. And I would just clarify one point, and this is partly to the deferral, partly just as an overall position, but I need to clarify that the test is not whether the site floods. It's accepted that part of the site floods. We acknowledge that. We've taken that into account. It's whether that it can be can actually accommodate the development without risk to future residents or additional risk to residents off-site or property or other things off-site. And it has been demonstrated that the site can be appropriately flood resilient. The accepted one property would be in flood zone 2, but there's appropriate mitigation that can come forward to ensure that they're not at risk. There's safe access and egress to the site, and it's been evidenced that it would not give rise to flood risk elsewhere. So they're the key tests. Just because part of the site floods, it doesn't mean we can support or justify a reason for refusal. We need to take an evidence-based approach. Is there mitigation? In this case, yes. If there wasn't, there'd be a different position. But I just wanted to clarify that point, because that takes forward, I won't quote the specific paragraphs of the MPPF, but that is the test we need to take forward. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Just one point. I think Councillor Foreski made the point that this really required a sequential test. Have you any comment on that?
Thank you, Chairman. Members will have seen in the report the approach we've taken to the sequential test, and I'll just find you the specific page, but page 136 through to 137. That sets out the position. I won't repeat everything that's in there, but we have compared it with, as we have done on all other sites where there's a level of flood risk there, in line with, sorry, Councillor Townsend shaking their head at me, but that the position we've set out in the report is to take account of the last sites, and that's the appropriate approach we've taken on other sites where there's area of flood risk. And what I would add to that is that in terms of the figures and numbers that Cranley has to provide, in the draft local plan there's 1,500, or just over that figure. That's published, that's agreed by the council to take forward. And what we've done is considered those last sites, and also considered the fact that there's needed over and above, taking those into account, plus allocated sites and consented sites. We still need to deliver over and above. So even if there is sequentially preferable sites, we still need to take account if there's other sites that need to come forward. So that's the approach we've taken. So we then moved on to the exception test and found the site to be safe from flood risk.
Thank you.
Chairman.
Councillor Hunter, did you want to come in on the deferral?
Yes, if they're taking odour tests, can they include the temperature that the odour test was taken at, the ambient temperature?
And Councillor Mulliner, I think you wanted to come back and talk.
Thank you. One brief comment, and one thing I apologise for not mentioning earlier. The other piece of information which I think we need is flood zone mapping, which takes into account the appropriate climate change adjustment. The first document of the 3 flood risk assessment documents acknowledges that the maps were drawn in January 2016, shortly before the Environment Agency changed the requirements for higher allowances for climate change. I think the committee is entitled to see the flood zone maps with those changes made. On the odour, I'm afraid I simply disagree. I think if we are supposed to take a decision based upon comfort that odour is not a problem, we are entitled to take account of whether we think the odour test is reliable or not. And given the evidence, which has not been contradicted as far as I know, that it was a cold part of the year when they were taken, I think we're not in a position to say that when the odour is likely to be at its worst, that this site will be safe from it. I've heard, obviously, anecdotally from people who've worked in the allotments, and they refer to the odour as absolutely overpowering. Now, if that's true, it's something we need to have tested in appropriately similar conditions. So I'm afraid I don't accept Peter's comments there. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we'll now move to the vote, please, for deferral. We've heard the proposer and seconder. and the comments that are made. Those in favour of deferring this to a later date, please show.
1, 2, 3.
Sorry. That's carried then. We will defer this to a later date, and ask Peter Cleveland.
Thank you, Chairman. Just if it's helpful, I'll just clarify, make sure I've got all the specific points down from discussion, and please add in anything that you feel necessary. But just with regards to the odour assessment and test and additional testing, the specific point was regarding recording of the temperature of that day. Sorry, okay. No. So, yeah, that point Councillor Mulliner made. Obviously, additional days will be required to take that forward, taking account of when it's potentially at its worst days, or factoring that into account. So that's the point on the odour test. In terms of the flood risk, I took 2 points. The last point there was the appropriate climate change mapping updated based on that, and to interrogate further the SUD's flood risk, the capability of the attenuation ponds within potentially flood zones to work appropriately, and also to map that against the appropriate climate change and any additional impact off-site.
In particular, I think it would be useful in this case if the Environment Agency gentlemen and the local flood authority people actually spoke.
Councillor Band.
Thank you, Chairman. I think the other thing, certainly I would like to see, is some evidence produced as to how it is anticipated that the subsystem will actually deal with what has been seen in practice, like floodwater appearing across the roads. And the other issue is the issue of the discharge. I know it's a separate issue, discharge from the sewage works into Cranley Water, and what happens there, and the acceptability of that under the varying climatic conditions. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Stennett. Wrong, sorry.
Sorry, did I jump the queue?
You did, okay. Sorry.
Go on.
Councillor Hyman first.
I'm upsetting you now. Yes, certainly. I would. I'm very keen to see the flood zone maps, and specifically to compare those with what we've seen on the videos, which happened certainly in 2013-14, December the 24th, was it 2013? And thereafter, because that's problems which we know from documentation we had with applications relating to Farnham, that there was a lot of problems. The Environment Agency had a lot of problems with the reporting of the flood levels that occurred at that time. They didn't have the data. This was reported by the lead flood authority, and I've got the emails, copies of the emails where they admitted that they hadn't recorded it properly. And I want to know what levels they're actually working on, and whether they are contradicted by what we've got on video. But particularly proposed land levels for this site, I don't think it's very meaningful for us unless we know what land levels are proposed for this development. And I'd agree also if we could drill further into the Water Framework Directive issues, because that is vital that we make sure that what we're doing isn't going to get challenged when we make a decision.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Patricia Ellis.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm a member of Cranley Parish Council. I'm very proud to be a member of Cranley Parish Council and have been for over 20 years. I do sympathise and understand with the presentation this evening, but I'm sorry to say that I found it unfair, inappropriate, and on a number of occasions incorrect. And I apologise to the officers and my fellow members. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Yeah. Councillor Foresky, do you want to add to this? Oh, sorry, I've got it wrong again. Councillor Stennett.
I do write it down.
Thank you, Chairman. You redeemed yourself there.
Peter, a question. Datum level is the one for the site? Fixed datum?
There will be, of course, yes.
Well, how do they work the flood zone out if they haven't got a fixed datum, firstly? And we should have a fixed datum from, say, the Elmbridge Road at a point, and then that should be the fixed datum for the whole site. Because if they're going to pick it up 2 metres, everyone else around is going to get flooded. If they're going to leave it where it is, the site's going to flood anyway. So how do we know what floods and what doesn't flood if we haven't got a fixed datum? You can't do willy-nilly. I refer to Nightingales in Cranley, where they built, I don't know, 16 houses, got the datum wrong, and it's a consistent aggravation of flooding. So without fixed datums, I don't see how you can even do a report. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Forresky.
Thank you, Chairman. I do obviously support the deferral. I think there's other issues that we should be looking at as well, as with the parking and the housing mix. But also I would like the sequential test to be included in the deferment, because I think I accept what Peter has said, but I think it needs further investigation, because there are other sites in Cranley that have come forward and will continue to come forward, and I think we need to make sure that we are looking at that, and that has its own sequential test finding that we can categorically say is right or wrong. So I think we need to look at that.
Thank you. It's a point I made a short time ago. I think we are there. Peter, are you on to anything else?
I've taken those points. I mean, there's been 2 additional points added after voting on the deferral. So I just think I need to make point on one of them, particularly with regards to the point regarding the foul drainage. We've moved very much away from the issues that were being discussed, and that's more of an environmental agency permitting regime which falls outside of our remit as a planning authority, and that is with the Environment Agency and Thames Water, because they work under a licence through them, and that's beyond what we can control. So I just need to be clear on what we're taking away, because that point was added and the sequential test point was added as an additional after the deferral. So I just want to be off through the
Sorry, that was my suggestion on Councillor Forresky's original statement, so I thought we were there. Does anyone wish to come back on that? We have got the deferral. Is that it? Yeah. Members, thank you very much indeed.